Most people won't tell you this, but the secret isn't motivation. The secret isn't talent. The secret isn't even discipline the way you've been taught to think of it. The real secret is forcing yourself to be consistent when every neural circuit in your brain is screaming to stop. When your body aches, when dopamine has run dry, when the reward system goes silent, that is the moment that changes your life. Let me tell you something rooted in neuroscience. Your brain doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't wake you up with a vision board. What it cares about, what it wires itself around, is what you do repeatedly. Patterns, repetition, behavior. The nervous system is shaped by action, not intention, not emotion, action. You want to know how elite performers get ahead? They build a relationship with boredom, with fatigue, with discomfort. They don't run from the hard days, they anticipate them because they understand the brain's plasticity window. The idea that what you do when it's hardest is what gets carved deepest into your neural architecture. So what does that mean? It means you need to force yourself to be consistent. Not once, not twice, but every single time you said you would. Why? Because your brain is watching. Your nervous system is adapting. Every time you choose to stay the course, to show up, to do the reps, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, you are training your future self. And here's what most people miss. Forcing yourself doesn't make you rigid. It makes you resilient. It doesn't limit your freedom. It builds it. Because the person who can do the hard thing when it doesn't feel good, when no one is clapping, when everything in their biology says stop, that person is untouchable. That person becomes unbreakable. Your goals don't care how you feel. Neurochemistry doesn't care about your excuses. You either show up or you don't. And when you do it over and over and over, without permission from your emotions, you begin to change. Neurobiologically, psychologically, physically, you become the kind of person who finishes what they start. So stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop hoping it will get easier. Force it again and again and again. Because consistency under duress, that is where transformation lives. And your brain is listening every single time. Most people are still chasing motivation like it's a resource they can summon on demand. Like if they just read the right quote, hear the right podcast, or feel the right burst of energy, they'll suddenly become unstoppable. But here's what neuroscience tells us, and it's critical. Motivation is unreliable. It's neuromodulator dependent. It fluctuates based on internal states, sleep, nutrition, social connection, hormonal cycles, and external cues. That means it's volatile. It's not something you can build a high-performing life on. What is reliable, what actually reshapes the neural circuitry of your brain, is consistency, specifically forced consistency. That means showing up and doing the thing even when motivation is at zero. Because here's the biology. Every time you act without the chemical incentive, without dopamine pushing you, you're training your prefrontal cortex to take control. That's executive function. That's top-down regulation. That's what separates people who wish from people who execute. And the beauty of it, over time, this act of forcing consistency creates its own feedback loop. You show up even when you don't want to, and eventually your brain starts to anticipate the reward, not from the result, but from the process. You become chemically reinforced by the habit of discipline itself. That's when the nervous system starts to shift. That's when it's no longer about whether you feel like it, it's about who you are. Your brain doesn't change just because you want it to. It changes when you give it evidence, repeatedly. The nervous system is governed by principles of adaptation, and it's incredibly efficient. It doesn't remodel itself based on potential. It rewires itself based on patterns, on what you do again and again. Every single behavior you repeat sends a signal through a neural pathway, and with each repetition, that signal gets stronger, faster, more automatic. This is called long-term potentiation, a fundamental mechanism of neuroplasticity. No, if you're inconsistent, even if your intentions are good, your brain doesn't reinforce those circuits. It doesn't encode that identity. But when you show up every day, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, you're literally telling your brain this matters. You're teaching it to allocate resources, to myelinate those circuits, to make that behavior more efficient, more accessible, and eventually more reflexive. And that's the difference between people who try and people who transform. The ones who transform understand this. You're not just building a habit. You're building a neural identity. Consistency is the language the brain understands. It doesn't speak ambition. It doesn't respond to potential. It responds to input, frequency, repetition, action. For the Humberman, there's a moment in every process, whether it's training, learning, or building something, when the dopamine drops out, that initial spark, that neurochemical wave that makes everything feel exciting and meaningful, it fades. And this isn't a flaw. It's expected. It's how the brain works. Dopamine is designed to rise in anticipation of reward, not in the maintenance of effort. So when the novelty wears off, when there's no more external validation, no visible progress, and you feel like you're grinding into nothing, that's where most people stop. But that's exactly where the opportunity begins. Because if you can keep going in that dopamine deficit, you're doing something profoundly powerful. You're decoupling your behavior from your need for internal reward. You're building what we call persistent circuits, neural pathways that don't depend on spikes in motivation to function. Instead, they depend on your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for goal direction, long-term vision, and deliberate control. When you continue acting without the chemical high, your brain starts to shift the way it assigns value. It learns this behavior happens no matter what. And that's when real endurance is built. It's not about chasing the next dopamine hit. It's about becoming someone who can operate regardless of the emotional landscape. That's what separates short-term intensity from long-term success. You want a breakthrough? Stay consistent after the dopamine is gone. Most people misinterpret boredom and discomfort as signs to pivot or quit. But in neuroscience, those signals are actually markers that you've entered the zone of real neurological adaptation. When you begin to feel bored, it often means the brain is no longer being fed novelty. But that's not a problem. That's a threshold. And if you stay in it, you start to build something most people never develop: friction tolerance. The ability to continue acting even when there's no stimulus, no excitement, no visible payoff. Discomfort operates the same way. When something feels hard, painful, or mentally taxing, it triggers stress responses in the body. Elevated cortisol, activation of the sympathetic nervous system. But here's what's remarkable. The human brain can learn to modulate that. You can train your nervous system to interpret stress not as a threat, but as a cue for focus, as a signal that you're working at the edge of your current capacity. And that's exactly where growth lives. The mistake is thinking that boredom and discomfort are things to avoid. In fact, they're signs you're in the right place. Elite performers, top researchers, peak creatives, they don't escape these states. They build frameworks to stay inside them longer. They understand the biology, that enduring and operating within these conditions is what triggers durable neural changes. So when you hit that wall, when things feel repetitive, uninspired, or physically grueling, that's not a sign to stop. That's a neurobiological invitation to stay exactly where you are and push further, because the brain is paying attention, and when it sees you stay in that space, it rewires to support the behavior that kept you there. There's a principle in neuroscience that most people overlook. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen when you're comfortable. It happens when your system is under strain, when you're pushing against resistance, when you're operating in that zone just beyond what feels manageable. That's where the brain becomes malleable. That's when it starts listening most closely to what you're doing. And this is key. What you do during those hard moments is what gets encoded Think about that. When everything in your body says stop, when your muscles are fatigued, your focus is fading, your emotions are volatile, and you still execute, still follow through, you're sending a powerful signal to your nervous system. This behavior matters even under pressure. That's how you reinforce it. That's how you hardwire it. It's not about just surviving those moments. It's about recognizing them as plasticity windows, openings, where the nervous system is primed to absorb whatever behavior you feed it. And if that behavior is consistency, if that behavior is effort without excuse, that's what gets baked into the architecture of your brain. Every time you act, especially when it's difficult, you're not just completing a task. You're casting a vote for the type of person your brain believes you are. And the nervous system tracks that. Not in abstract terms, but in real structural changes. Synaptic connections strengthen around the behaviors you repeat, not the intentions you set. So if you consistently follow through, even when you're tired, distracted, uninspired, you're literally sculpting the identity of someone who is reliable, someone who finishes, someone who endures. And this isn't philosophical, it's biological. The brain works through feedback. When you take action, even small, and especially in moments of resistance, you reinforce circuits in the prefrontal cortex associated with self-direction and internal control. That becomes your baseline. That becomes the default wiring. Your system begins to expect consistency from you, and it starts automating that behavior. Over time, what was once forced becomes reflexive. But it cuts both ways. If you break promises to yourself, skip the work, delay the practice, make excuses, your brain encodes that pattern too. It learns that discomfort equals escape, that challenge equals retreat. And that becomes the identity, not because you chose it, but because that's what you repeated. So this is about more than willpower. It's about identity construction through behavior, built on the foundation of neuroplasticity. Every time you override resistance and show up anyway, you are hardwiring the belief that you are the type of person who does, not dreams, not plans, does. One of the most important distinctions to understand, especially if you want to rewire your life at the level of the brain, is that action changes the system, not intention. You can journal about goals, you can visualize success, you can map out detailed plans, but until you act, your nervous system treats all of that as noise, because neurons don't fire and wire based on what you hope to do. They wire based on what you actually do. Behavior is the currency your brain trades in. It's how the system assigns relevance. Every time you take a concrete step, especially a repeated one, you're reinforcing specific neural pathways. That becomes your internal model. That's how the brain decides what to make easier, more automatic, more available the next time. The more you act, the more efficient the circuitry becomes, and the more efficient the circuitry becomes, the less energy it takes to act again. That's how habits form at a neural level, through execution, not contemplation. So if you're waiting until it feels right to start, you're misunderstanding the system. It's the behavior that creates the feeling over time, not the other way around. You act first, and then your nervous system starts to catch up. It begins to associate effort with familiarity, repetition with confidence, struggle with progress. That's when momentum becomes physiological, not just psychological. In other words, your thoughts don't drive transformation, your actions do. And when those actions are repeated under pressure without needing permission from your emotional state, that's when the nervous system starts to see that behavior as part of your identity, not something you do, someone you are. The moment you force yourself to act when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or completely against your emotional grain, you begin building something far more valuable than motivation, resilience. And not just mental resilience, but physiological resilience. Your nervous system learns through exposure. It adapts to stress through controlled doses of strain. So when you consistently show up, especially on the days you feel resistance, you're training your system to tolerate more, to recover faster, and to remain stable under pressure. Here's how it works. Every time you override the impulse to quit, you engage top-down control from the prefrontal cortex. That means you're strengthening the very circuits responsible for emotional regulation, decision-making, and sustained focus. Over time, these circuits become more dominant, and as they strengthen, your baseline shifts. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once triggered avoidance now triggers engagement. And that's where the real shift happens. Because the person who can take action without needing ideal conditions becomes immune to the fluctuations of mood, energy, and environment. It's not just willpower, it's neurological conditioning. You've trained your autonomic system to stay regulated in adversity. You've built stress tolerance at the level of the brainstem and limbic system. You don't just look consistent, you are consistent because your entire physiology has been shaped by repeated exposure to discomfort without retreat. And that's what builds real confidence, not because things get easier, but because you get stronger. The system no longer panics when stress shows up. It gets to work. It executes. And that's the kind of resilience no external factor can touch. Self-discipline isn't something you're born with. It's not a trait that's fixed at birth, nor is it a skill that you simply acquire with age. What self-discipline truly is, at its core, is neural conditioning. And the incredible thing is, it's one of the most malleable aspects of our biology. Through consistent, repeated action, particularly under pressure, we can train our nervous system to prefer doing the hard thing, to find meaning in the struggle, and to tolerate discomfort without flinching. And here's the paradox. While it feels like you're forcing yourself through sheer willpower, what you're really doing is training a part of your brain to automatically choose the right behavior, even without the active decision-making process. This is automatic discipline, where the action becomes ingrained and the effort feels less like effort because it's hardwired into your system. The more you condition your system in this way, the more it becomes part of your natural behavior. Self-discipline isn't a force you have to summon from some deep reservoir inside you. It's a skill that you hone and develop through consistent neural reinforcement, just like learning to play an instrument or training your body for physical endurance. And the beautiful part is that the more you practice it, the more automatic it becomes. It no longer feels like pushing a boulder uphill. It feels like a part of who you are. You see, transformation doesn't happen in the moments of ease or comfort. It doesn't happen when everything aligns, when the conditions are perfect. Transformation happens in the moments when you want to quit, when you feel like you can't go any further, when it's hardest to keep going. And that's precisely when the brain is primed for the most profound change. When you push through in these moments, when you show up despite the resistance, you're creating new neural patterns that never existed before. Here's why that matters. The brain doesn't just learn from success. It learns from struggle, from challenge, from friction. When you force yourself to stay the course during adversity, the nervous system adapts in a way that makes that behavior easier the next time. Every time you fight through that discomfort, you're creating a new neural baseline, a new level of capacity. You teach your system that you can handle more. You teach it that obstacles are not walls. They are stepping stones. The brain learns to seek solutions, not to retreat. And it's not just a one-time shift, it's cumulative. The more you force yourself to act when it's hardest, the more you expand your threshold. The more you build capacity for stress, for challenge, for uncertainty. This is how elite performers build their careers, how athletes push past plateaus, how creators make their best work. It's not that they don't feel the pressure, they've simply trained their nervous system to stay in it, to remain productive, to keep going when others would falter. So when you face those moments when quitting feels like the easy answer, remember, that is where your future self is being made. In those moments, you are building the person you are becoming. Your nervous system is molding itself to reflect the actions you take now. If you back down, you reinforce weakness. But if you push through, you reinforce strength, resilience, and a mindset that can handle whatever comes next.